I've got a cupboard full of vases, but I can never find the perfect one. If that sounds like you, why don't you shop your own home and create a vase out of something you've already got? Now this is a biscuit barrel. Merry and bright it says, and at Christmas time I added this decal and used my biscuit barrel as a hurricane lamp. I put in some pearl barley at the bottom, some Christmas trimmings and a fantastic pillar candle. Now it's time to take off this lettering and reimagine this biscuit barrel as a vase ready for my spring blooms.
When I originally made the Merry and Bright decal, I used a permanent vinyl because I imagined I was going to keep the hurricane lamp like this for however long forever is when you are an avid crafter. So in order to get the vinyl off, I'm having to use my hairdryer and then pick at it using the weeding tool from my Cricut machine. This is such a satisfying job to do, but it did take a few minutes to do, probably about 10 minutes overall. But when you can manage to get a good run at it, it's quite satisfying when the letters just seem to ping off. It did take me ages to work out, though, that in order to stop my glass jar rolling around, if I turned it up on its end, it would be steadier. But also the jet of hot air from the hairdryer was pushing the container all over my work surface. I used a little bit of white spirit to get rid of the last of the sticky residue, just pouring a small amount onto some kitchen towel and rubbing it over the surface until it was lovely and sparkling clean. I'm going to give my glass container a very modern, minimal makeover using this dark grey chunky wool. I'm going to create a sort of basket weave effect, but with a very light touch. So the first thing I need to do is measure out how long a length of wool I need to go from one end of the vase, of the container, down the side, across the bottom and back up the side again. And then I'm going to cut about 8 lengths of that and then glue them in place. So I'm going to glue them underneath the ridge of the container, take it underneath the base of the vase and up and over the other side, just making sure that I keep the wool nice and taut and as even as possible so it doesn't wobble around. And you can see me here using my silicone kitchen spatula just to hold the wool in place in order that I didn't burn myself on the hot glue. For my second piece of wool, I put it halfway between the first section, sort of quartering the glass vase, so it would make it easier for me to decide where to put the next placements. So taking them from one side to the other, and by doing that, being quite mathematical about it, they all ended up being evenly spaced. I then trimmed off the excess wool underneath the rim of the container, and just to cover up all those gluey ends, took a length of the wool and wrapped it around a couple of times, gluing it in place. And then just to make sure that everything was firmly secured, I turned the glass container upside down and glued under all these strands of the wool at the bottom of my vase, just so they didn't slide around, and I kept that lovely even spacing as if it was segments of an orange. If you give this project a go, you could of course leave your container just like this and perhaps even use something smaller like a jam jar. But I've decided to embrace the sort of modern basket look, and I'm going to weave some wool horizontally around the edge of the container. So you can see me here just measuring out how much wool I need to go around the edges, and then I'll cut off a few extra lengths so I can put 3 or 4 lengths of the wool to create a crisscross effect around the edge of the vase. So I start by threading a piece of wool under the first piece of the vertical, the upright, and then, as you would if you were weaving, go under, over, under, over, under, over until I get right back to the beginning, and then fasten that off, and then take the second piece and reverse it, so going over, under, and then carrying on like that, so that you start to create this really open basket weave effect. I've decided to keep quite an open look to my basket weave. Of course, if you wanted to, you could do a much more dense form of weaving so that you practically covered all your glassware up. So I'm here tucking in the beginning and the ends of each round of wool and gluing them in place, and then I'll cut off any excess wool and this makeover will be finished. But do stay on and watch more of the video and I'll show you a quick upcycle for an old jam jar. I got the idea for this next project from the spring edition of Flora magazine, and I'll leave a link up in the cards above and in the show notes underneath the video of my review of this magazine and also the spring edition of the Flower Ranger. So if you love your flowers and crafts, they're really great magazines to subscribe to. So I spotted this article called Wrap and Recycle, where they'd taken an old water bottle, I think, rather than a jam jar, and glued wool around the edges. So I'm calling this a jam jar, but it was a jar with mango chutney in it. So just a nice straight up and down container, and I've taken the label off, and then I need my hot glue gun, the same wool as I used before, and also I've got a little bit of a pom-pom trim that I'm going to add around the edge. This project couldn't really be any easier. Now, I did start off with having a piece of double-sided tape at the bottom of my jar, but I didn't have enough to continue the project. So I started off with my double-sided tape, wrapping my wool round, keeping it really, really taut, and just notice how I've caught in the loose end at the start of my wool. So it's tucked up under the first 3 or 4 rounds of the wrapping so it won't unravel. But I then did have to go on and intermittently add dabs of hot glue in because I had run out of the sticky tape, and I think actually in hindsight it gave it a much firmer finish than the double-sided tape would have done. When I came to the shoulders of my jar, it wasn't quite so easy to keep the wool firmly in place, so I had to add more hot glue in than I had done previously, and just making sure I put the tiniest dot in, because as it dries it goes to sort of milky white colour, and sometimes your eye goes to the gaps in the glue rather than to the woolly finish that you're trying to put around the jar. And then as I put the last few wraps of wool around, just making sure I got right up to the top of the jar and just finished off covering the screw section of the jar with wool and just hiding everything out of place and trying to get as a professional finish as I could right at the end. And I ended up cutting the wool off a slight diagonal and then letting it sort of blend into the top of the jar so it didn't end with a bump of wool. So I could have left my jar like this, but I decided to add a little bit of embellishment, and I'm using some of this pom-pom trim. And when I originally put it around the jar, it looked a little bit sparse. So I decided to add in several layers, so I had more pom-pom per centimetre. So I'd love to know what you think about this project and whether you plan on giving it a go. Should I have just kept it as a single round of the pom-pom, perhaps at the top of the jar, or would you have put it around the shoulder of the jar like I did here? So watch on to the end of the video. I'm going to show you how I styled these 2 containers using some beautiful yellow tulips. And of course we always think about tulips as being the quintessential spring flower, but you will find them for sale either in your florist or your local supermarket from before Christmas right up until the end of May, and perhaps even beyond. And as you can see here, for my spring decorations, I've got my tulips in 2 of my upcycled glass vases, and then in a series of test tube vases as well. And as they mature, develop over the week that you enjoy them, they do move and grow towards the light, so they never quite stay put. But a fabulous flower to work with. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you again next time. And don't forget, if you love things flowers and all things craft, I do have a great free Facebook group. I'll leave the links to that in the show notes underneath the video. It'd be great to see you there.